what would you give to be more persuasive when you talk? Here are the 6 books which I've just read that covers exactly that topic, because some arguments in your life will really, really matter. There will be times where you have to verbally make your case, share your ideas, and get others on board. And when that happens, this video will be here to help you. This is going to be a bumper video, so feel free to click around into different places that you find useful, because I've distilled the knowledge from these 6 books in a way that should be much faster to understand than actually reading the books. And now that the channel has reached not just 1,000 subscribers, but 3,000 subscribers, thank you very much for your support. I'm gonna be doing a Q&A video, so please put your questions in the comments and I will do my best to answer as many of them as possible. Right, now that's enough housekeeping, so let's go on to the first book, The Elements of Eloquence. Now, essentially, the argument that this first book is making is that if you know how to use figures of speech well, then you will automatically be more persuasive. Mark Forsyth, who's the author, has made this a homage to the English language. And the way the book is structured is that each chapter is essentially dedicated to a specific rhetorical device, which he goes on to explain and gives lots of examples of. Some of those devices we've covered elsewhere on the channel, things like parallelism, antithesis, and anaphora. But because this book is so comprehensive, it's worth sharing the good ones that you might not know about.
Bond. James Bond.
Brexit means Brexit.
These are both examples of diacope, and diacope is not just good for making memorable phrases. He shows that it's often something that causes us to misremember things as well. In the film The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West never actually says, "Fly, my pretties, fly."
Now, I remember her saying, "Fly, my pretties, fly." We even called them pretties. Did all of us just make up that name for nothing?
That's something we're misremembering after the fact. That's the power of this device. Mark Forsyth's quite good at grabbing your attention. This whole book is quite readable, and one of the ways that he does that is to actually use the devices in his explanations, and here's a quote that shows you how he does this. Before we get to hypotaxis, that's the device he's going to go on to talk about, we've got to go through parataxis. Parataxis is like this. It's good plain English. It's one sentence, then it's another sentence. It's direct, it's farmer's English. Parataxis is the natural way of speaking English. It's the way English wants to be spoken. English is basically uninflected language. Everything depends on word order. It's all subject, verb, object. The man kicked the dog. The cat sat on the mat. The angels have the phone box.
Angels have the phone box.
The angels have the phone box. That's my favourite. I've got that on a t-shirt.
Hypotaxis is the opposite of that, where instead of your sentences being linear, they're very gushing. It happens to be a way of speaking that we associate with very posh people in Britain. And here's what Mark has to say about it. You can't gush with hypotaxis. If I told you she's beautiful and clever and rich, that would be the paratactic way of saying it, then you'd think that I was afflicted with the most tedious variety of love. But let's see how Jane Austen says exactly this with hypotaxis and how it sounds. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings in existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world, with very little to distress or vex her. You can almost see Miss Austen winking at you over a cup of tea. So this was new knowledge to me. Parataxis is a good way of being extremely direct and getting to the point, but you might want to use hypotaxis to make your strong emotional feeling seem more civilized by beating around the bush a little bit. Essentially, I'm going to use this book like a bit of a reference guide. It's a simple read, the tone is light and humorous, and there's so much useful knowledge packed in. I'm going to use this when I want to try out new techniques, or if I can remember a figure of speech but can't quite exactly remember what it is, I can look it up in here. The second reason I like this book is that it's good if you know what you want to say but don't quite know how best best to say it. And if you can have more influence by using these devices, then why wouldn't you? The author here is giving us tools to play with. Imagine the comparison with an expert musician like Mozart. He wasn't just born a genius because he knew all the techniques already. He became a genius because he mixed and blended those techniques in an original way. That's generally the case for lots of historical examples of elite talent. They have a period of learning the techniques of their craft before they move into the period of being creative with them. So if you want to be a master of something, you've got to learn the building blocks first before you can come up with a masterpiece. And the third reason I think this book deserves a bit of attention is because of the polarization of politics that we're living through right now. So I had one YouTube comment about this that illustrates the public dissatisfaction that comes as a consequence of that. He said, lies that sound better than the truth. Is this down to style? Well, possibly. Academics, extremely knowledgeable, but boring. They'll receive much less media coverage than big slogans like take back control, Brexit means Brexit, and following the science. It's clear that the right ideas don't always sound as good as bad ones, and so attention doesn't always get given to the ideas that are deserving. But I would argue if you can use that style to your advantage, then truth is no longer on the back foot. In order to convince an audience, you have to win on style as well as substance. That's why learning rhetorical style is important. If you sound boring, even if you're saying the truth, it's just not going to resonate with people. Second, How to Think, Speak and Write Effectively by Rudolf Flesch. Now this is a really old book that's been sitting on my shelf for some time. I actually can't even remember how I got it, but the insights in this book are surprisingly good. Each chapter is essentially an essay on a different aspect of communication. There are sections on quotations, on courtrooms, and the links between how we use language and how we think about big topics like science, politics, and even causality. And the main lesson from this book is that when we change our use of language, we change the persuasive power we can have with our words. So what advice does Rudolf give us? First, he says, use simple words. Academics are very bad for this, as this painful example on fascism shows. What is the essence of fascism? It is also the use of nationalist feeling, justify a policy of foreign adventure in the hope, thereby, of redressing the grievances which are indexed to capitalist decay. I mean, it hurts my eyes to read that, and yet I know that there's so many people who do that. Instead, we can rewrite this in simple language. What makes fascism? It plays on the people's love for the country, to make dangerous plans against other countries, and so, they hope, to set right the wrongs made by capitalism in decay. I would say you could probably go one better than that using ChatGPT, but you get the idea. Second, he says, use more exact language. See how vivid a difference this makes with this. Can you imagine a local magazine who is describing a priest who's the new owner of a local cafe? They could say it just like I did, but what about if they use exact language? Father Ruffalo serves a parish of 17,000 inhabitants in the rugged southern slopes of central Puerto Rican mountains. He regularly says Mass in 32 locations, of which 13 have chapels. Services elsewhere are in tiny mountain huts. When you spend a little bit of time finding those details, it makes your writing so much more vivid. I love this idea because so many people think facts are boring, and actually we can use them in a way to help people engage with what we're saying. So if you're talking about your ideas, get specific about the details. This is the point in the video where I usually say if you're enjoying it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. But because I'm going to use exact language, I'm going to say you could join the 2,799 subscribers as of the 23rd of July 2024, and I hope you decide to. On to the next book, which is called Factfulness. 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. Our human intuition comes with some pretty significant limitations. We have hardwired vulnerabilities designed to shortcut logical processes. That's useful in the wild if we need to make quick decisions to survive running away from a lion. You don't want a brain that's going to think logically in that situation. Put that same brain into modern society, and these shortcuts can get hijacked by misinformation. What this book is saying is persuasion isn't just about using the right words. It's sometimes about how you feed new facts directly into the parts of people's brains that make them stop, pay attention, and change their mind. And think how much better your life could be, how much better the world could be if we could consciously overcome those inbuilt limitations limitations. That's what this book is set up to end. Irrational, bad decision making despite facts. So the approach of this book is to focus on 11 different instincts that feel intuitive but often lead us to the wrong conclusions. Here they all are on screen. Below each one is a short description of how it works and an example of the mistakes that can result. There's some, like the urgency instinct, which can happen because of cognitive bias. When someone makes us believe something is urgent, we're more likely to take action than if we think it can wait. Just think about how much you see language like special offer, today only, now or never, all language used by people trying to get us to make a particular decision. That doesn't just make us pay attention to the wrong things. Sometimes that overwhelm of urgency burns us out. Climate change is a good example of that. It makes us apathetic to the slower actions that could actually work better. I've applied this insight about the urgency instinct to my YouTube channel. So when I was first starting out, I saw loads and loads of advice telling me that I needed to upload every single week or I would never ever succeed. And I just knew that I couldn't do that. There's quite a lot of thought that goes into these videos, and I knew that I would only be able to keep it up if I went slower than that. And now that the channel has reached nearly 3,000 subscribers, I feel like that was a good insight to have used. Now there's other kinds of instincts, like the gap instinct, which happens because human intuition is not very good with numbers. We love to compare extreme outliers. We love to assume that any differences between averages are evidence of some massive inequality, when in actual fact, if you showed the data in the correct way, the groups would look a lot more equal. Here's the examples of that he uses, from comparing average math scores between men and women to average income per day between America and Mexico. Now, for me, this book really resonates with how I see a lot of public debate in the Western world. If there was one thing that I could do to improve the decisions we make, it would be to help us see when our intuition is deviating from reality, and to put that in your face all the time, because we know it happens all of the time. If you work as an advertiser or a political campaigner or a tabloid journalist, it's your job to play on the instincts that are in this book, to manipulate our opinions, our behavior, even our shopping habits. It's even part of the advice that famous YouTuber and entrepreneur Alex Hormozi gives to create compelling offers. He says, make it urgent, make it seem scarce. That's how you get dollars rolling in. Now, his is a simple goal. He wants to use that knowledge to help people make money, and that's fine. But for me, this knowledge could be used instead to make us wiser, more rational, and make better decisions about how to create policy for our countries. So if this book's convinced you that that's a problem, then you might ask the next logical question. Can these instincts be challenged? Hans says yes, with 3 things: questions, willpower, and data. Questions, because we need to know what we can ask that will challenge our wrong instincts. Willpower, because that thinking takes effort, space, and courage. And that brings us on to the reason why this book in particular is so good. It's the data. There's loads of graphs, loads of pictures, many of which turned my own assumptions upside down. There are so many positive stories in the data being presented. This graph shows that by 2027, non-Westerners will make up the majority of the most developed countries. I didn't know that developing countries are no longer doing as badly as I thought. Fewer people are dying from natural disasters. Do you think crime is going up? Here's the graph showing it's going down. Literacy levels are going up. Women's education's going up. World hunger going down. All of these things can challenge our thinking just by presenting us with clear information. What this book has taught me is that persuasion can be a matter of just having the right evidence. If we listen to data, we ask the right questions, we can overcome our inaccurate instincts. And it gives me a lot of hope that it is possible to persuade even when you're up against one of these instincts. Give it a read and tell me what you think. Words that work. Dr. Frank Lutz is a pollster, and he's conducted over 1,500 surveys before he wrote this New York Times bestseller. The main argument of the book is that there's 10 rules of effective language, and here they all are: simplicity, brevity, credibility, consistency, novelty, sound, aspiration, visualization, questioning, and context. For each one, he gives us some great anecdotes and examples before applying them to case studies from business and politics. And Frank gives us 2 other pieces of wisdom building on his rules. Now, piece of wisdom number 1. It's not just the words that you need for persuasion, it's the message behind it. And messages need messengers to embody them. Now, you could do that by linking what you're saying to your background and your journey and your achievements. A great example of this is Nelson Mandela. He overthrew apartheid in South Africa through peaceful means, but it was his imprisonment, his links to previous violence, his suffering for his cause. All of these things came together to make him the perfect messenger to embody the idea that apartheid needed to end. The second piece of wisdom is that it's not what you say, it's what people hear. We need to judge our performance by the effect on the audience, not whatever our own intentions were for that piece. Again, this goes for me when I'm looking at the YouTube analytics. If there's a dip in the retention curve, there's no point whatsoever thinking it's a problem with the viewer. Instead, I have to take that as you teaching me what you like and don't like, and I just have to try extra hard to learn for next time how to be better. I love this because it's brutal. If I go down the rabbit hole of thinking, oh, but this should have worked, then I'm not going to get anywhere. But if I use my audience's behavior as the standard to judge myself against, then it's an objective standard. Incidentally, it doesn't really matter what area you work in, whether it's customers in the corporate world, voters in the political world, or clicks in the online world. Audience is the only truly objective measure for how good you are. If they don't react as you hoped, it's probably because you didn't use the right words, or you didn't judge that audience correctly. That's something to work out for next time, and Frank helps us with a list of myths and truths about audiences that he's picked up from his experience to help you. And if you're feeling helped so far by the video, please don't be afraid to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Win Every Argument by Mehdi Hasan. Now, he's not quite saying that all you need to do to win every argument for the rest of your life is read this book, but it's still a pretty good read anyway. At the start, he asks, what would you do if tens of thousands of people depended on you winning an argument? That question alone should be enough to help us want to learn the techniques that might help us win. Now, it's written by Mehdi Hasan, who, like me, cut his teeth at an Oxbridge debating society. But unlike me, he's gone on to make a career out of his talents, and he runs rings around politicians, journalists, and anyone else using dodgy debating tactics. This book is essentially his accumulated knowledge, illustrates the lessons that he's learned through real debates that he took part in, and it's extremely readable and page-turning. So here we're going to set up 3 questions the book is designed to answer. 1. What are the key principles of persuasion? 2. What tactics could give you an advantage in a tense situation? And 3. What is the best way to prepare? So first, what are the key principles? Mehdi starts by giving general advice, and you learn quite quickly that the kind of advice he's giving is about winning at all costs. This is not a book that is concerned about lofty principles getting in the way of beating an opponent. That's clear when he says things like, pathos beats logos every time. He's essentially saying that you should try to appeal to your audience's emotions, not just their logic, which is a rather Machiavellian statement. But there's an ethical reason as well. Even when you have your facts locked down, he says, they won't have any impact unless you incorporate feelings as well. It's also why he says, play the man and the ball, and dedicates a whole chapter to the art of the ad hominem attack, how best to do it, and how best to defend against it. Now, he's not encouraging this sort of debate, but he is saying that people use this all of the time, and you need to know how to defend yourself against it. Because this is an area of argumentation that people are often hesitant to talk about, it's really interesting that Mehdi devotes so much detail to it. So he deals with 3 types of ad hominem attack: attacking their character, their qualifications on the subject, or their accuracy in the past. Now, I do find ad hominem attacks unethical, but persuasion isn't just about fighting dirty, and Mehdi also says interesting things about persuading cleanly. So 3 things. First, make eye contact. That will build an emotional connection with your audience. Second, make jokes. Use humor. That will make you more likable, and it's important to make your humor self-deprecating rather than attacking other people. Thirdly, most importantly, show your receipts. Showing receipts is one of the biggest lessons I've taken from reading this book. It means that your opponent can't wriggle out of a trap that you've set for them. Mehdi uses this a lot when he catches people out by quoting their own words back to them in a way that they don't realize, or pinning them down to a claim that they've made. So we've already talked about one tactic, which is showing your receipts. So second question is, what tactics could give you an advantage? Now there are loads of tactics in this book, but I'm just going to focus on the two that I thought were highest value. Firstly, it's how to set booby traps, and secondly, how to deal with serial bullshit who he calls gish gallopers, who make things up on the spot faster than you can deal with them. Does that remind you of anybody? So first, booby traps. These build on the idea of showing your receipts by adding on a question that is dangerous for your opponent, because you know the answer and they don't know that you know. One brilliant way to do this is to use your own opponent's words against them.
How come you didn't mention that meeting to Congress, given it's so relevant to their investigation?
I did. As part of the investigations, I certainly disclosed any meetings. The very few I had.
Not in the congressional testimony you gave to the House. We went through it. You didn't mention anything about August 2016 meeting in Trump Tower. They specifically asked you what context you have, and you didn't answer that.
I don't believe I was asked that question.
You were asked, were there any formal communications or contact with the campaign? You said, apart from writing papers, putting up yard signs, no. That's what you said. I've got the transcript of the conversation here.
There to talk about Iran policy.
Are you there to talk about Iran policy? Mm-hmm. Don't you think that's something important to disclose to the House Intelligence Committee while you're under oath?
I did.
You didn't. We just went through the testimony. There's no mention of the Trump Tower meeting in August 2016. Why not?
I don't know if they got the transcript wrong.
And another is to trap them with a question. Now, there's a brilliant example of how to do this in the book from Christopher Hitchens.
Let me ask a question to Mr. Heston. Can he tell me clockwise what countries have frontiers and borders with Iraq, starting from Kuwait?
Kuwait, Bahrain, Turkey, Russia, Iran.
Exactly. You don't know where it is, in other words, do you? You have no idea where the country is on the map, and you're in favor of bombing it now rather than later on the whim of a president.
Sure, that the instantaneous command of the geography of the region.
Oh, I don't know. I think if you're in favor of bombing a country, you might pay it the compliment of knowing where it is.
Hitchens had come prepared. So the second tactic is about how to deal with somebody who is frankly just making stuff up. I think it was Terry Pratchett who wrote about a lie getting around the world before the truth can get its boots on. And we live in a post-truth era where people like Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, and Vladimir Putin have media strategies that are based on denying facts. So we should all do ourselves a favor and learn how to deal with this. Here's Mehdi's advice. First, don't try to refute everything they say. They will make stuff up faster than you can refute it. Focus on the one example that will destroy their credibility on the whole issue. So for example, in one of Mehdi's most famous debates on Islam, where somebody uses this tactic on him, he just focuses on one statistic.
On a factual point, you said that Islam was born in Saudi Arabia. Islam was born in 610 AD. Saudi Arabia was born in 1932 AD. So you were only 1,322 years off. Not bad? Not bad start.
And that throws doubt onto the rest of what she says. Second, he says, don't let it go when they try to wriggle away. Bullshitters will rely on constantly moving on, but they can't cope if you delve into the detail of what they're saying on a single point. Finally, show the audience their strategy for what it is. Show how they're using the tactics of Trump or Boris, because if you can get the audience to agree with you, nothing can protect them more from the bull that is being spouted on the other side. 3. What is the best way to prepare? Up till now, we've been focusing on cold technical skills of debate, but Mehdi also has a section on soft skills. To be persuasive, he says, we need a few things. First, we need to project confidence, and that means managing our emotions. We have to learn to control our body language, because that influences how people perceive us even before we start speaking, and remaining calm in the moment, no matter what. That's vital to keeping your audience open to what you're saying. Finally, he stresses the importance of research and practice. Skill doesn't come overnight, but it's also not rocket science. If you implement the lessons, over time you will get the compounding effect and you can achieve great things. He tells you a lot about the importance of doing your homework and research about an issue, practicing what you're going to say before you say it, so that you can nail it if you're in a high pressure situation. I'm not going to lie, I really like this book. I'd love to have written it myself. I don't know if that's just because me and Mehdi come from similar backgrounds backgrounds, have similar experiences, but he says a lot of things that I instinctively agree with. My only doubt is that this book raises some important questions about whether debate is about winning or whether it's about trying to seek the truth through refined arguments. I think it's the latter, but he seems to be talking about it much more like it's the former. We all want to believe that we're the good guy. What we can agree on, though, is that mastering these techniques can help the truth to stand out against a lie. But we also have a duty, a responsibility even, to make sure that we don't misuse these tactics. The Political Speechwriter's Companion. Now, this is the chunkiest book of the lot, and I've left it until last because it's not really just about politics. This book covers all aspects of public speaking, from research to humour to presentation and even the ethics of persuasion. It discusses formulas for creating humour, exercises to try, and even checklists for you to assess your own material. This book is really full of tips and tricks, so I'm going to pull out the best ones that relate to persuasion alone. Here are the 3 fundamental questions this book answers. How do you structure a persuasive argument? What techniques will make you more persuasive? And how do you deliver a speech convincingly? Now, structures give us a format to translate the idea of what we want to say into actual words, sentences, and paragraphs. Now, coming up with that on the spot is something that I think only the most practiced speakers can do well. Instead, the rest of us should rely on using structures from long-term memory so we can focus on our delivery instead. And there's 3 main structures that are worth talking about in speech writing. The first is Monroe's motivated sequence. Now, this is used in all sorts of famous speeches, from Martin Luther King's Dream Speech to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address to JFK's inauguration speech. It was first described in the 1930s by Professor of Rhetoric Alan Monroe from Purdue University, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, in the state of Indiana. The structure follows 5 basic bases, so you always know what order to put your points into. Now let's look at a classic example, JFK's inauguration speech, to see just how brilliantly this works. First, you need to grab attention somehow with a quote, story, or statement.
For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago.
Next, you have to set out the problem you're persuading about clearly. For JFK, the problem was the threat posed to freedom and democracy by global conflict.
For man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe.
After problems, there must come solutions. JFK, unlike another president, thought that the solution rested not in America withdrawing from the world, but joining in cooperation with its adversaries.
To those nations who would make themselves our adversary, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Before the dark powers of destruction, unleashed by science, engulf all humanity.
Now here's where Monroe starts to get interesting. Up until now, we've just been making any other logical argument, but to make it persuasive, we need to appeal to emotions. And in Monroe's structure, that happens with visualization.
Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce.
These images make us able to see what the impact of that solution is, and it's powerful stuff. But we're not done yet, and Monroe ends on the final climax, the clincher, the call to action. And this is probably one of the most famous lines in JFK's speech.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
Super. So if you understand Monroe, you can adapt it to any public speaking situation. It's different from debate where you're trying to engage with somebody else's argument and refute it, deconstruct it. With Monroe's structure, this is about how we convincingly set out a picture of our own point of view when we get a chance to speak uninterrupted. Now there's a couple of other structures that the book gives us in specific situations. Trying to propose a new idea, then use proposal, persuasion, punchline. Say what you're going to do, illustrate it with an example or argument, and then end on that poetic statement, that clincher that captures the heart of your position and your audience. Or maybe you know what you want to say, but you can't quite find that inspirational ending. Then the structure you should use is the 4-part close. First, inspire. Whip up the sentiment of your audience by looking at what you've told them in a new way. Then, draw a lesson. Focus on what new insight you want the audience to take away from what you said. Third, call to action. Use this to build the momentum. Ask for what concrete actions you think should follow on from your lesson being taken to heart. And finally, you add that clinching line, that piece of poetry, to make people feel inspired and like they've really got it. And if you watch to the very end of this video, you'll see how I try to use the 4-part close for this YouTube video. Having dealt with structure, the second key idea of this book is to focus on simple, memorable language. We've already talked a little bit with Rudolf Flesch about how to make it simple. Speeches should be at 8th grade language level. Rally speeches are at 5th grade. Use short words and simple sentences. Martin Luther King didn't talk about deracialization. He talked about little black boys and black girls holding hands with little white boys and white girls, and it made that image seem more real. That sort of concrete detail is exactly the same as the exact language we talked about earlier in Rudolf Flesch's book, and now's a time that you can start to get that in. It's something I find quite difficult, but it's really, really important for people to understand you. Second, we want language to be memorable. And there are 3 suggestions about how to do this. Repetition, litany, and a technique they call the how the hell. Really doesn't sound good in a Scottish accent. So first, you want to repeat your key phrases at the start of sentences, at the end of sentences, or by reversing the clauses. Those are the principles behind the rhetorical devices anaphora, epistrophe, and chiasmus. And it's the reason we remember the dream speech. It's the reason we remember the phrase government by the people, of the people, for the people, and countless other phrases. And to improve it further, if you use litany, that will allow you to create repetition out of lists of your most boring points. Litany works like this. Let's say you've got a sentence where you say, our proposal will bring benefits X, Y, and Z. Whereas lists basically just list things. Instead, what you could say is, under our proposals, X is going to happen, and then we're going to move on to Y. And when that works, we'll do Z too. This is litany. Litanies have a couple of advantages over lists. One, they allow you to build impact and emotion in situations where lists just keep things very steady. That build can make it seem like you have lots of examples, whereas a list might underplay it. Secondly, it makes you seem dynamic as a speaker. Finally, the how to hell tactic is where a tiny bit of research goes a long way to give you a credibility boost with your audience. Essentially, you look something up very particular to that audience where you're speaking, a historical date, a nearby restaurant, a famous tradition, and you use it. You could drop it into your framing, or in an intro, or in a joke, or a put down, but it will always make that audience remember that you knew the thing no one else did. Well worth doing if you ask me. In fact, this is something that even Taylor Swift did when she came to my hometown of Edinburgh to do a concert. She was reported in the media about saying something. I bet that was prepared earlier. That's the sort of thing that is so easy to prepare early, and it gets a massive reaction from the audience, and it gets media coverage as well. And now that we've covered all the different aspects of persuasion that are about what you say, now we need to get all of that work, all of that preparation, all of that strategy to get you into a position to make the final slam dunk. So now we're going to focus on how you say say it. Delivery is the final key idea in the Speechwriter's Companion, and I'm really impressed by how much advice is new and detailed in here. This is a really good book to pick up if you want to get better at delivery. So first, appearance. It's honestly a really bad thing about society that we trust speakers who are better looking, taller, and most importantly apparently, not bald. The data, unfortunately, is pretty clear on this. If you're a taller man, if you're more attractive, you have enhanced effectiveness as a social influence agent, as researcher Shelley Chaikin puts it. They say, you can't make yourself taller, but you can help people to form a good impression of you before you even open your mouth. So given that, unfortunately, this is just the way things are, the authors advise you to stand straight and dress slightly more formally than your audience in order to form a good impression. Secondly, movement. What do you do with your hands, your face, your eyes? With eyes, you should be trying to look at people, not at your notes and not above the audience's heads. When you do have to look, just glance. Absorb as many words as you can from your notes and then look directly at the camera again. They mention how Bill Clinton's teleprompter broke down during one of his speeches, but he still managed to look up 90% of the time. That's what you should try to do too. What about facial expressions? Their advice is to make them appropriate. So that means look happy to be there at the start, but that if you're talking about something serious, then looking serious isn't a bad thing. Now with gestures, they suggest different kinds of categories of gestures. Pointing for addressing individuals. You'll often see British politicians pointing with their thumb like this because this is perceived as aggressive. Give outstretched hands when you're talking about giving or support. You put your palms to your chest for receiving or sympathizing. One hand up for rejecting ideas. Index finger up to emphasize caution or warning. And their final piece of advice is to use gestures that suit your own personality. Like dance, the idea is that you should be comfortable, loose, and able to express your feelings and emotions with your body. Voice. Your voice and gestures should work together, and you can have a lot of fun with this. But how exactly? What are the features of voice that we can use to modify how our message is heard? First, there's pitch, and everyone from weather announcers to comedians slightly exaggerate this to come across.
Let's talk like British TV presenters.
All right.
It's a great day if you love science. You start talking up high, and then you finish your sentence down low.
We can enhance the speeds too of our speech. Then there's rhythm. Having a steady beat to his speech is thought to be one of the things that made world totalitarian dictator Adolf Hitler so persuasive. And comedian Jimmy Carr, nothing to do with Hitler, also swears by it.
Most great public speakers sort of speak in a rhythm. It doesn't matter how fast they're speaking, but they're kind of hitting 92 beats a minute. So I tend to listen to a playlist of songs that are all 92 beats a minute before going on stage. I know that sounds like madness, and maybe it is, but I think there's something about that rhythm that just the audience, that kind of the proximal speed of cognition, that idea, everyone kind of gets into that rhythm. And when you look at the great public speakers, they all seem to be hitting that rhythm of 92 beats a minute.
And in any rhythm, sometimes pauses are useful to emphasize what you're going to say after it. And then there's the things you shouldn't do.
Don't turn your back, don't look away, and don't blink.
Yes, don't do any of those things, but also don't and ah, and don't mispronounce words. If you have to write out the pronunciation, do that. The final principles. Now, the last thing about delivery is to understand what the principles are. First, speakers have to be liked, have to be upbeat, come across optimistic, and they must be able to relate their message to the ordinary person in the audience who might not know as much. Because even if they're not as well informed, they will definitely know their own sense of value and ideas and about what they think about you, the speaker. So we should treat every speaking situation as an opportunity to practice those parts of delivery until they come as second nature. Use people who are your friends in order to give you feedback on how you come across if you're giving a work presentation. They'll find it fun and you will find it useful. Lastly, always be learning. Your effectiveness as a communicator in any situation, whether it's business or whether it's like in my job, medicine, speaking to patients, your effectiveness as a communicator will already be improving because you're watching videos like this one. You are learning the techniques in order to improve incrementally, and that can only be a good thing. One day, it might really matter. You might, because of having watched this video, use these techniques and convince one extra person of your point of view. You might change your mind in that one important argument in your life that might just be around the corner. And if you're wanting to see some more of these techniques in action, then you might like this video about Obama, or there's this one about Tony Blair instead. I'll see you in the next video.